Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. Today, we are going to discuss the film The Last Witch Hunter from 2015. The air in modern-day Manhattan hums with an ancient, barely contained magic, a stark contrast to the sleek glass towers rising all around. Our guide into this hidden world is Calder, the titular Last Witch Hunter, a figure seemingly plucked from a dark, medieval tapestry and dropped into the 21st century. He moves with the weary grace of a man who has seen too much death, a consequence of his immortal curse. Centuries ago, in the Black Plague era, Calder fought and managed to defeat the Witch Queen, but not before she cursed him with immortality, ensuring he would never know the peace of death while she remained imprisoned, not truly destroyed. This long existence has honed his skills, making him an unparalleled tracker and fighter, driven by a singular, obsessive purpose. He operates under the authority of an order that functions almost as a secret police force for magical anomalies, keeping the fragile truce between the mortal and supernatural worlds intact. His primary tool, beyond his impressive collection of enchanted weaponry, is his unique ability to sense the residual magical energies left behind by his quarry. The story really kicks into gear when the Witch Queen, dormant for 8 centuries, begins to stir. Calder senses the disturbance immediately, a cold premonition settling deep in his bones. His investigation leads him to Chloe, a seemingly ordinary but exceptionally talented baker whose inherited talents are anything but mundane. Chloe, unaware of the true scope of her heritage, is a dreamwalker, a rarity even among witches, capable of navigating and manipulating the subconscious realms. This power makes her crucial, both as a potential key to stopping the Queen and as a massive target. Calder, accustomed to working alone and distrusting all magic after his tragic past, the loss of his own wife and child to the very evil he fights, initially treats Chloe with suspicion, viewing her as another complication. However, as the Queen's influence grows, manifesting in devastating attacks that blur the line between reality and nightmare, Calder is forced into an uneasy alliance with her. He needs her unique insight into the magical plane. She needs his protection and experience. The film draws on a rich tapestry of fantasy influences, evident in the grand scale of the magical battles and the deep lore surrounding the various covens and artifacts. Calder's relentless pursuit is mirrored by the subtle machinations of the Queen's remaining followers, who are working to fully resurrect their sovereign. We see glimpses of Calder's training and the grim acceptance of his duty, a burden he carries with the stoicism often associated with legendary lone heroes. As the plot deepens, Calder uncovers a crucial piece of forgotten history. The Witch Queen was not merely defeated, she was bound using a specific ritual, a binding that required the sacrifice of the hunter who defeated her. The realization dawns that his own immortality is tied to her confinement, and that breaking the cycle demands more than just another fight. It requires a genuine connection and an understanding of the magic he has spent centuries trying to destroy. The climax builds towards a confrontation where the Witch Queen achieves nearly full manifestation in the mortal world, threatening to unleash a plague far worse than the one that first necessitated Calder's war against her. In the final desperate moments, Calder, guided by Chloe's dreamwalking abilities, must confront the Witch Queen not just with steel and spells, but with the very source of his own enduring strength, the memory of love and loss that fuels his crusade. The resolution hinges on a complete relinquishing of his curse and the embrace of human vulnerability, allowing Chloe's pure, untainted magic to finally sever the Queen's hold on both the spiritual and physical worlds, finally granting the ancient hunter the possibility of a future, or perhaps an end. Calder's entire being is calibrated for perpetual war. One senses in his weary eyes, deeply set beneath the shadow of his trenchcoat, the echoes of countless battles fought across epochs. His commitment to the order, the clandestine body he serves, borders on religious fervor, a necessary structure to contain the chaos he knows lurks just beyond the veil of everyday perception. He carries enchanted weaponry that crackles subtly even when holstered, relics imbued with the essence of defeated dark entities, a testament to a career built on grim efficacy rather than heroic glory. His initial dismissal of Chloe, the dream-walking baker, stems from a profound, almost visceral, fear of connection. Every past relationship has only served as collateral damage in his war against darkness. Chloe, in contrast, radiates an unexpected warmth, the scent of yeast and cinnamon clinging faintly to her even when she is channeling formidable subconscious power. She is an artist in her own right, shaping not just dough but the very fabric of internal reality. Her introduction to the supernatural world is jarring, ripping her from the quiet rhythm of her bakery into a maelstrom orchestrated by an ancient evil. Her initial awe quickly turns to steely resolve as she realizes the danger she poses simply by existing, a dangerous lineage surfacing at the worst possible time. The contrast between Calder's rigid, ancient adherence to rules and Chloe's fluid, intuitive grasp of magic creates friction that eventually burns away into mutual respect. Their interactions are steeped in tension. He is the immovable object hardened by duty, and she is the unexpected force capable of shifting his perspective. When they delve into the nightmare landscapes Chloe navigates, the audience gets a visual feast reminiscent of darker fantasy epics where psychological terror becomes physical reality. It's within these dreamscapes that the true nature of the Witch Queen's power is revealed, a parasitic entity feeding on fear and regret, the very emotions Calder has tried to suppress for centuries. The discovery that his immortality is the very key to the Queen's containment, a grim, symbiotic lock, is a devastating blow to the hunter's worldview. He had always seen his unending life as a punishment that enabled his mission. Now he sees it as a trap that perpetuated the status quo. This narrative beat elevates the film beyond simple monster hunting, infusing it with personal stakes rooted deeply in philosophical concepts of sacrifice and release. The Queen, when she finally corners Calder, doesn't just offer death, she offers oblivion, twisting his need for an ending into a temptation to surrender entirely. The final confrontation is less a display of brute force and more a metaphysical struggle for Calder's soul. Chloe, standing firm beside him, becomes the anchor in the storm, her unjaded perception of magic acting as a pure counterpoint to the corruption the Queen embodies. The breaking of the curse isn't achieved through a spectacular magical explosion, but through a quiet, heartbreaking acceptance by Calder, the admission that the life he lost was worth the pain of remembering it, and that true victory means stepping out of the endless cycle of revenge. It is the emotional resonance of his past love that ultimately empowers Chloe to deliver the final, definitive blow against the ancient darkness, finally freeing the world, and perhaps the hunter himself, from the shadow of the plague. Calder's perpetual motion is a defense mechanism against stillness, against the quiet moments where memory rushes in like a tide. He is a man defined by absence, the absence of his wife, the absence of peace, the absence of death itself. His armor is not just the hardened leather and enchanted plating, but a practiced indifference, a shell built layer by layer over 800 years of witnessing the cyclical nature of evil. When he interacts with the modern world, the whirring traffic, the glowing screens, it feels foreign to him, an inconvenient backdrop to his eternal vigil. His skill set is a brutal, beautiful blend of medieval swordsmanship and esoteric knowledge gained through relentless study of grimoires long since rotted to dust in forgotten libraries. Chloe's existence is a vibrant splash of color in Calder's monochromatic existence. Her bakery is a sanctuary of warmth, an environment predicated on nurturing and transformation, turning simple elements into something sustaining. This contrasts sharply with Calder's methodology, which is purely destructive. Her gift, dreamwalking, isn't an acquired skill. It's an innate empathy, a terrifying window into the shared unconscious. When Calder first witnesses her in action, not fighting but seeing the Queen's influence as a psychic infestation, his carefully constructed arrogance cracks. He has always fought monsters he could stab. Chloe fights the despair they implant. The growing dependency between them is layered with unspoken tension. Calder, a man who views emotion as a liability, is slowly forced to rely on Chloe's humanity. He starts offering small, almost involuntary gestures of protection, like instinctively positioning himself between her and perceived danger, actions that feel startlingly clumsy for such an ancient warrior. Chloe, meanwhile, begins to see past the grim facade, recognizing the deeply buried man underneath the legend. She doesn't seek to cure him, but rather to validate the suffering that has fueled his longevity. The historical revelation concerning the binding ritual, that the hunter's life force was the final anchor, reframes the entire narrative. It suggests that the very order Calder serves might have perpetuated his suffering for their own stability. This betrayal, or at least misunderstanding, adds a deep layer of tragic irony to his entire career. His sacrifice was supposed to end the threat, not sustain it indefinitely. The final confrontation leans heavily into the psychological horror that Chloe navigates so expertly. The physical battle is merely the reverberation of the struggle taking place in the ethereal realm Calder has long avoided. The Queen attempts to break him not with fire or shadow, but by tempting him with a finality that feels like the sweetest imaginable reprieve. If he simply yields, the cycle ends for both of them. Calder's ultimate refusal to surrender to this tempting oblivion, choosing instead to fight alongside Chloe using the painful clarity of his memories, is his true victory. It's an act of self-acceptance. When the Queen is finally banished, the magic binding Calder snaps, not with a violent explosion, but with a profound, sudden quiet, leaving the hunter standing in the wreckage of the battle, finally subject to the slow, irreversible passage of human time. The silence following the Witch Queen's final expulsion is perhaps the loudest sound Calder has experienced in 8 centuries. The magic that once clung to him, an abrasive, buzzing shroud, recedes, leaving a terrifying void of normalcy. He stands amidst the ruins of the final confrontation, feeling the subtle alien sensation of fatigue, real mortal weariness settling into his bones. This new vulnerability is both horrifying and profoundly liberating. The world, stripped of its supernatural urgency, suddenly rushes in with the clamor of 1,000 unexpected details. The smell of rain mixing with the lingering scent of ozone, the distant, indifferent wail of an ambulance siren, the simple weight of his own suddenly mortal heart beating a panicked rhythm. Chloe, exhausted but whole, offers a hand. Her touch, devoid of the electrical charge of centuries-old magic, feels grounding, real. She doesn't offer platitudes about his heroic deeds. Instead, she recognizes the cost of his newfound mortality. For Calder, who has spent epochs viewing connection as a catalyst for future tragedy, accepting her presence is the hardest fight he has ever faced. The structured life provided by the Order, the very framework that defined his existence, now seems obsolete, perhaps even oppressive, given that they benefited from his perpetual imprisonment. He has to reckon with the prospect of a future not dictated by ancient vengeance, a concept as foreign to him as joy. His departure from the Order is not a dramatic severance but a quiet fading. The surviving members, dependent on the stable, controlled environment Calder enforced, are left bewildered by the sudden removal of their primary deterrent. Calder, shedding the heavy mantle of the last witch hunter, walks away from the world of secrets he inhabited, leaving behind the arsenal of enchanted iron and ancient texts. He chooses not to seek out the historical records that might explain the full manipulation by the Order, recognizing that dwelling in the past, even the recent past, would only invite the curse of immortality back in a different form. The final image offered is of Calder moving through a decidedly non-magical space, perhaps a quiet coastal town far removed from the vertical ambition of Manhattan. He is learning the simple acts of living, waiting for a train, ordering coffee, enduring the slow march of a sunset. He is aging, microscopically at first, but the change is undeniable, a slow reclamation of the time stolen from him. His immortality was broken not by superior power, but by choosing human connection over superhuman duty. The relief is not triumphant. It is the deep, quiet satisfaction of a long, arduous journey finally reaching its necessary, humble end. The transition from relentless sentinel to ordinary man is fraught with subtle terrors for Calder. He finds himself constantly scanning crowds, his muscle memory preparing for threats that no longer materialize. This hypervigilance, honed over centuries, refuses to simply switch off. He watches pedestrians move with a disquieting lack of urgency. They dawdle, they argue over trivialities, they simply exist without the shadow of impending magical doom looming over them. This freedom feels less like a reward and more like a profound disorientation. He is learning the etiquette of being mortal again, a culture shock worse than being thrust from the Middle Ages into the modern era, because now he has memory of a life beyond the simple driving obsession. Chloe remains his essential tether. She understands the weight of a life redefined, her own connection to the dream world, while no longer a weapon against the Queen, retains a soft echo, allowing her to perceive Calder's internal shifts, the moments his phantom armor threatens to reform. She doesn't push him toward activity, but rather encourages stillness. She notices when he stares too long at the ocean, perhaps searching the horizon for the outline of a long-vanished ship or a familiar coastline from a forgotten century. Her warmth is an active defense against the cold isolation that was once his only companion. She introduces him to simple pleasures, the taste of a perfectly ripened summer fruit, the sound of unforced laughter, experiences he had consciously walled off, deeming them distractions unworthy of an immortal warrior. The Order, now operating without its most formidable asset, struggles to maintain the delicate balance. Rumors filter back, whispers carried on the wind that they are faltering, that minor magical incidents are increasing in frequency. Calder hears these faint echoes of chaos but feels no pull toward intervention. That responsibility belongs to the successors, to those who have not paid the ultimate price for that knowledge. His disinterest is absolute. The fight was never truly about the world's safety, but about escaping the curse. With the Queen gone, the cage door is open, and he steps through, leaving behind the ghosts of his duty. His aging is not swift, but it is visible, a slow erosion of the supernatural resilience that kept him looking perpetually mid-30s. A fine network of lines begins to etch itself around his eyes, lines that weren't there when he fought the Queen. These lines, earned through quiet days and shared moments with Chloe, are more precious to him than any enchanted blade. He finds a quiet purpose in tending to Chloe's garden, an act of creation mirroring her own inherent nature. He trades the weight of enchanted steel for the weight of fertile soil, finding a strange, earthy comfort in cultivating life that grows, blossoms, and ultimately accepts its end. This acceptance, the quiet surrender to time's dominion, is the final, profound realization of his victory. The scent of rich, turned earth becomes Calder's new creed, a direct antidote to the metallic tang of blood and brimstone that had permeated his senses for centuries. In the quietude of his new life with Chloe, the external world sheds its threatening veneer and begins to reveal textures he had been willfully blind to. He starts noticing the specific, nuanced colors of twilight, not just as a marker for the hour when magical threats increase, but as a spectacle in itself. This newfound appreciation for sensory detail is a sign of his healing, a gradual reintegration into the human experience. Chloe actively encourages these moments of quiet appreciation. She never probes about the specifics of his past horrors. She knows that those memories, once sacred fuel for his crusade, are now liabilities if clung to too tightly. Instead, she focuses on building new sensory anchors. She might simply place a warm mug of tea in his hands, forcing him to pause and absorb the heat. A simple physical reality that contrasts sharply with the abstract reality of eternal combat. Her patience is remarkable, an understanding born from her own ability to navigate the fluid, non-linear space of dreams. She knows that transformation takes time, even when the magic holding the process back has been eradicated. Calder struggles most profoundly with the concept of unearned rest. He still wakes abruptly, phantom pain gripping his chest where the Witch Queen's curse had been physically anchored to his soul. These moments require Chloe's immediate reassuring presence, a physical confirmation that the dawn has broken without catastrophe. He begins to understand that his immortality was not just a curse, but a form of profound spiritual paralysis, a refusal to participate in the natural order of things. His interaction with his own reflection changes dramatically. Where once he saw a tireless weapon, perpetually ready for deployment, he now sees a man aging, subtly flawed and wonderfully temporary. The weariness in his eyes is no longer just battle fatigue, it's the accumulated weight of history finally being processed. He begins to talk, haltingly at first, about the small details of his life before the plague, the name of his wife, the feel of sunlight on a specific cobblestone street, not as mournful recollections, but as reclaiming pieces of himself that the war had confiscated. The faint whispers of the Order's decline serve as a gentle reminder of the world he left behind, but they carry no emotional pull. He might hear a news report about an unusual localized electrical surge or a sudden unexplained blackout, and simply nod, acknowledging the consequences of leaving the supernatural plumbing unattended. He has made his final definitive choice. The fate of the world is no longer solely his burden, and that divestment of ultimate responsibility is the truest form of freedom he has ever known. He trades his ancient, imposing silhouette for the softer outline of a man learning to be content with a single, finite lifespan, rich in shared, fragile moments with the woman who taught him how to stop fighting and simply be. The silence, once threatening, now settles around Calder with the comforting weight of a familiar, if recently rediscovered, blanket. He finds that the absence of the constant magical hum allows for other sounds to emerge, sounds that Chloe has patiently encouraged him to notice. The chirping of crickets in the evening, the precise rhythm of Chloe's kneading as she works the dough, the satisfying thud when he sets down a spade after a long afternoon of tending the soil. These are sounds of creation, not destruction, and they force a recalibration of his entire sensory input. He begins to differentiate between the exhaustion born of mortal labor and the deep, soul-sapping fatigue of unholy combat. His acceptance of aging manifests in small, almost humorous ways. He has to consciously remember to adjust his seating position. His back, once capable of sustaining inhumanly rigid postures for days on end, now protests a poorly chosen chair. He discovers the strange fascination of watching Chloe interact with younger people, neighbors, customers, and sees reflected in their easy confidence the life his curse had stolen. He realizes that true courage isn't the willingness to face down a demon, but the willingness to engage in something beautiful, knowing it will inevitably end. Chloe, sensing his deepening immersion, gives him space while remaining a steadfast presence. She understands that a man who lived 8 centuries in the mindset of a living weapon needs time to learn the language of vulnerability. She often finds him simply watching her work, his gaze intense, not with predatory focus, but with the careful observation of an archaeologist studying a newly discovered artifact, the artifact being the human spirit. Sometimes, she catches him touching the old, faint scar on his forearm, the one acquired during the initial binding of the queen, tracing the faint line as if confirming it is still just a mark, not a portal for return. The concept of legacy, which previously translated only to the continuation of the order, shifts entirely. His legacy now resides in the garden they cultivate, in the quiet continuity of Chloe's bakery, in the simple fact that he chose a life that ends over a life that merely persists. He recognizes that the true power of the witch hunter was never his strength, but his commitment to duty. Now, his true strength is his commitment to the present moment. When they occasionally discuss the order, it is with the detached curiosity one reserves for a particularly persistent historical footnote. Calder feels no guilt about abandoning them, only a profound relief that he is no longer their necessary, immortal cog. The world may descend back into minor chaos, but it will be a chaos that allows for growth and change, rather than the static, eternally threatened balance he maintained. His final act of defiance against his past is not a fight, but a decision to simply be ordinary, to let the slow, steady rhythm of a finite life wash over him, finally allowing him to earn the rest his long, lonely watch denied him. The ordinary routines become the new fortifications against the lingering echoes of his past. Calder finds a peculiar satisfaction in tasks that require precision but lack existential dread. He takes meticulous care of the simple tools Chloe uses in the bakery, oiling the antique stand mixer with the same focused attention he once reserved for sharpening blessed silver blades. This translation of skill from the metaphysical to the mundane is his way of processing the colossal shift in priorities. He is, for the first time, tending to things that can be fixed, maintained, and eventually replaced, a stark difference from the eternal, unfixable nature of the evil he fought. Chloe notices that Calder is beginning to genuinely laugh, a sound that emerges infrequently but carries the deep resonance of something long dormant, finally cracking free. It is usually prompted by his own clumsy attempts at domesticity, perhaps misjudging the strength needed to crack an egg, resulting in yolk spread across the countertop. Instead of reacting with his usual centuries-old precision, he accepts the mess, a small, tangible victory over perfectionism. He is learning that imperfection is the defining characteristic of life, not a flaw requiring immediate correction. The landscape of his memory also begins to soften. The sharp, crystalline images of his dead wife and child, once weapons used by the Witch Queen to maintain his relentless drive, slowly evolve. They become less about the moment of their loss and more about the warmth of the moments preceding it. He can finally recall the sound of his child's uninhibited glee without the immediate, crushing weight of knowing it was extinguished. This is the true healing, the ability to hold joy and sorrow simultaneously, without one wholly consuming the other. Occasionally, an artifact of his former life surfaces accidentally. Perhaps a delivery driver drops a package near their quiet property, and Calder instinctively drops into a defensive crouch, his hands instinctively searching for the hilts of swords that aren't there. These moments are brief, jarring returns to the old operating system. Chloe never judges these lapses. She simply waits, perhaps placing a comforting hand on his shoulder until the adrenaline subsides and the modern world rushes back in, gentle and unassuming. He realizes that his curse wasn't just immortality, it was the enforced isolation required to wield that immortality effectively. By choosing Chloe, by choosing a shared, finite existence, he dismantled the very conditions necessary for the curse to hold power. His final tribute to the lost world of witch hunters is to live well outside its bounds, demonstrating that the ultimate act of defiance against darkness is not perpetual war, but persistent, enduring love. The long vigil is over. The long, quiet life has finally begun. The slow assimilation into normalcy is a process of constant, delicate negotiation within Calder's mind. He finds that the vast, empty chambers of his memory are slowly being refurnished with the small, tangible details of his present life with Chloe. He starts noticing the way the morning sun hits the dust motes dancing in the bakery, transforming the mundane air into something momentarily sacred, a phenomenon he never would have paused to witness when battling shadow demons under perpetual moonlight. His body, stripped of the magical augmentation that masked his true age, begins to subtly reflect the passage of time in ways that are both uncomfortable and deeply validating. A stiffness in the morning is not the precursor to an enchanted duel, but the simple complaint of aging joints. Chloe's influence extends beyond emotional support. She introduces him to concepts like retirement and leisure, foreign words that initially sounded like synonyms for complacency. She encourages him to read, not ancient tomes of demonology, but actual novels. Stories where the heroes struggle with recognizable human failings and achieve endings that involve either happiness or final rest. Never just a transfer to a new, endless assignment. He discovers that fictional suspense, devoid of real consequence for him, is remarkably relaxing. There are rare, unavoidable instances where the lingering shadow of his career touches their peace. A sensationalized news report might briefly cover the inexplicable collapse of an old structure, rumored to be a forgotten meeting place for a minor coven. Calder watches the footage with a detached clinical eye, identifying the likely magical cause, the shoddy containment efforts of the successors. He feels no urge to intervene, only a faint sense of professional critique. This detachment is the final victory over obligation. He understands that he was a necessary anomaly for a specific dark era, and that era is now definitively closed. The profound realization dawns upon him that while he couldn't save his first family from death, he is actively choosing to participate in his own, albeit delayed, end alongside Chloe. This deliberate choice of finitude is what lends meaning to every shared meal, every quiet evening spent by the hearth. He sees that true strength lies not in resisting change, but in embracing the flow of time, even if that flow is now slower and more deliberate than he is accustomed to. His former life was a straight, endless line of conflict. His current life is a rich, winding path leading inevitably toward a peaceful terminus. The last witch hunter has, finally and irrevocably, become just a man, patiently waiting for his due. The silence of their small home, nestled far from the arcane tremors of the city, is punctuated only by the quiet industry of two people building a future on borrowed time. Calder finds a strange, almost poetic beauty in routine maintenance. He has taken to fixing the small, squeaky hinges on the pantry door, a task that requires patience and a precise application of effort, qualities he once poured exclusively into dispatching immortal foes. The act of greasing a hinge feels like a symbolic act of self-repair, smoothing out the rough edges of his own history. He sees the simple, predictable nature of mechanical failure as a comfort, something he can master without the threat of eternal reprisal. Chloe, observing his focused intensity on these domestic tasks, often teases him gently, comparing his careful scrutiny of a wobbly chair leg to the way he must have examined dark artifacts. She understands that his meticulousness is the last vestige of the hunter's discipline, repurposed for domestic harmony. She encourages his moments of reflection, not by demanding stories, but by creating spaces where memory feels safe to surface. When they walk along the quiet coastline, she doesn't rush him past the tide line. She encourages him to watch the water recede, a perfect metaphor for the gradual ebbing of his curse. He starts engaging with the wider, non-magical world with tentative curiosity. He visits a local historical archive, not seeking occult lore, but seeking information on the architecture of the city where he lived centuries ago, trying to reconnect with the man who was a husband and father before he became an immortal executioner. These excursions are nerve-wracking. Every unfamiliar face feels like a potential informant or an agent of the dormant order. But Chloe's steady belief in his new trajectory grants him the courage to continue these small explorations of his own past life. The most telling sign of his transformation is his relationship with sleep. For centuries, sleep was a necessary risk, a moment of vulnerability the Witch Queen could exploit, or simply a blank space in an otherwise relentless existence. Now, sinking into bed beside Chloe feels like a legitimate destination, not a temporary pause. When he dreams now, the nightmares of fire and brimstone are interspersed with strangely bright, almost impressionistic flashes of his first family, unmarred by the pain of their demise. These dreams are soft, ephemeral, and crucially, they leave him feeling refreshed, not haunted. He realizes that the essence of his first wife and child was not their tragedy, but their love, and that love, finally detached from the need for vengeance, has become the stabilizing force of his new life. The hunter has finally laid down his weapons, not out of defeat, but out of profound, quiet contentment. The passage of time, once a mocking constant for Calder, now manifests in the gentle alteration of his appearance, a roadmap etched by experience rather than enchantment. He observes the subtle softening of his jawline, the silver threading its way through the remnants of dark hair, milestones he never expected to witness. This aging is a deeply intimate process, shared quietly with Chloe, who treasures every visible sign that he is fully present in the human timeline. She documents these changes not with photographs, which feel too permanent for their deliberately transient existence, but through observation, noting the new timbre in his voice after a long day of manual labor, or the way his eyes now crinkle when he genuinely smiles. He finds an unexpected kinship with the local elders in their small community, men and women who speak of decades with an air of profound accomplishment. Calder listens, absorbing their perspective on enduring decades, realizing that 800 years of relentless vigilance is functionally equivalent to having lived through nothing at all, as he never truly experienced consequence or progression. He starts offering advice, filtered through the lens of centuries of observation, yet carefully stripped of any explicit supernatural context. His wisdom sounds less like arcane knowledge and more like extremely experienced, albeit somewhat eccentric, life counsel. The lingering threat from the shattered remnants of the order becomes negligible. They are too mired in bureaucracy and the fear of another world-ending threat to notice the silent apostate living a quiet life by the sea. Should any magically inclined entity stray too close to their perimeter, Chloe's innate sense, a gentle intuition rather than a powerful weapon, alerts her, and they simply ensure their doors are locked and the lights are off. There is no epic confrontation, there is only avoidance, a strategy Calder masters in his final role as a civilian, seeking only peace. One evening, sitting with Chloe as they watch the sun dip below the horizon, Calder speaks of the Black Plague years, not as a warrior recounting battles, but as a historian describing a distant, terrible event. He speaks of the fear, the arbitrary nature of death, and the crushing weight of being singled out for an unnatural existence. For the first time, he articulates the true horror. Not the fighting, but the endless isolation required to keep fighting. Chloe listens, offering no judgment, just the steady comfort of her presence. In that moment, the shadow of the last witch hunter dissipates entirely. He is no longer defined by what he hunted or what cursed him, but by the simple, profound act of choosing to stay, to age, and to love, knowing full well that the end, when it comes, will finally be absolute and deserved. The contentment Calder finds is rooted in the fragility of his new reality. He consciously seeks out things that are ephemeral, the perfect crust on Chloe's morning bread, which will be devoured by noon, the precise, fleeting moment the migrating birds pause in their trees before continuing their journey. The way Chloe's hand fits perfectly in his, a fit that time will eventually, gently undo. This acceptance of impermanence is the bedrock of his recovered humanity. He realizes that the true curse of immortality wasn't the unending life, but the inability to appreciate what would soon be gone. He begins to interact with the local geography not as potential battlegrounds or hiding spots, but as places to share. He learns the names of the surrounding hills, not for their tactical advantage, but for the way the fog rolls across them in the early autumn mornings. He helps Chloe source ingredients from local farmers, engaging in the simple give and take of barter and commerce, a system of trust and mutual need that starkly contrasts with the unilateral authority he wielded as the hunter. Chloe, whose dreams used to be nightmares of external threat, now dreams of domestic bliss tinged with soft melancholy. She dreams of Calder laughing easily, dreams of their shared future fading into a gentle sepia tone, the loss inherent in the vision softened by the preceding years of genuine joy. She never fears waking up alone. She trusts the anchor they've forged together. Her greatest ongoing project becomes ensuring Calder acknowledges his own victories, not just the defeat of the Queen, but the daily, quiet triumph of choosing life over duty. There are moments of profound tenderness that would have been unthinkable 8 centuries prior. Calder, who once treated his body as a mere vessel for enchantments and combat, now allows Chloe to tend to him, applying a balm to a stiff knee, or simply holding him close when the residual anxiety flares. His gratitude is immense, wordless, and expressed through absolute commitment to their shared present. He starts writing again, not spells or tactical maps, but prose, trying to capture the ineffable quality of their peace. His handwriting, stiff from centuries of wielding heavy weaponry, gradually smooths out. These journals, hidden safely away from any possibility of rediscovery by the Order, are his legacy. A record not of monsters slain, but of a man redeemed by love. The final entry he commits to paper is simple: "The war is over. I finally learned how to stay." It is a statement of finality, an admission that his greatest achievement was not his eternal crusade, but his very mortal surrender to a shared, beautiful ending. The journals become Calder's final sanctuary, a space where the untamed power of his past can be safely contained within the rigid structure of ink on paper. He writes sparingly, almost reluctantly, as if each word drawn from him diminishes the tangible reality they have built together. The act of forming legible human sentences feels like a physical recalibration of his very consciousness, replacing the dense, coded lexicon of demonology with the simple syntax of affection. He finds a peculiar satisfaction in using the same steady hand that once expertly carved runes of binding to now form the looping elegance of the letter C when writing Chloe's name. Chloe, respecting the sanctity of his private world, never pries open the covers of those worn notebooks. However, she observes the physical effect the writing has on him. His brow, which had held a permanent, near-invisible furrow of anticipation for disaster, smooths out when he is writing. It suggests that by externalizing the memory and channeling his relentless focus, he is finally processing the trauma rather than simply outrunning it. Their life together settles into a quiet rhythm of mutual caretaking. Calder, ever the protector, begins to worry about Chloe in ways that are entirely human and unrelated to magical threats. He frets over her exposure to the early morning chill while tending the garden, or whether the small bakery oven is efficiently heating the shop. These are trivial concerns, yet they are the threads that weave him back into the fabric of everyday human existence. He is learning that vulnerability is not the weakness that leads to destruction, but the shared condition that allows for true intimacy. One crisp afternoon, while they are sitting on their porch, a small robin lands fearlessly on the railing nearby, chirping insistently. Calder watches it, not as a potential familiar or an omen, but as a creature wholly absorbed in the immediacy of survival and song. He turns to Chloe, his eyes clear, and offers a statement that encapsulates his entire 8th-century journey. It doesn't know it will end, but it sings anyway. Chloe simply reaches over, interlacing her fingers with his, a silent affirmation that this awareness, the knowledge of finitude coupled with the choice to embrace the present, is the core of their shared victory. The final poignant detail of Calder's return to mortality arrives not as a dramatic event, but as a collective silence within him. One morning, he wakes up, and the phantom tingle of latent magic, the subtle, ever-present static that had been his background noise for 800 years, is simply gone. He breathes deeply, tasting only the clean, salty air of the coast and the faint residual sweetness of Chloe's baking. He is no longer the last witch hunter, not even in residual sensation. He is simply Calder, a man who is old, tired, and deeply loved, standing on the precipice of a final, natural sleep, a peace finally and unequivocally earned. The utter cessation of the internal magical hum leaves Calder momentarily adrift, like a ship whose anchor has suddenly been lifted in a calm sea. The ensuing quiet is so absolute that he instinctively checks his own pulse, a reflexive action driven by centuries of expecting the spectral reassurance of the curse to be present, however faint. When he finds only the steady, organic beat of his own finite heart, a rhythm increasingly punctuated by the occasional skipped beat he's learned not to panic over, a wave of true serenity washes over him, so potent it feels like a physical cleansing. This absence is not the void that followed the Witch Queen's expulsion, but a completeness, the final piece of his borrowed essence slipping away. Chloe notices the change immediately. His eyes, which once held the haunted depth of witnessing too much history, now possess the soft focus of a man looking only at the immediate horizon. He seems lighter, less weighted by the sheer volume of his existence. She sees him standing in the doorway of the bakery one afternoon, illuminated by the golden, unfiltered sunlight, and for the first time, he does not look like a warrior trying to blend in. He looks like a proprietor awaiting the lunch rush. His silhouette, once sharp and imposing, has softened, rounding into the comfortable shape of a beloved fixture. He engages in one last, symbolic act of letting go. He walks down to the small shed where he kept the few relics he couldn't bear to destroy, a single, unblessed dagger, a map tracing ancient, now irrelevant ley lines. He gathers them, not with reverence or rage, but with the mild disinterest one shows towards old correspondence. Instead of burning them, a dramatic gesture that would imply a continued engagement with the past, he buries them deep beneath the roots of the oldest oak tree on their property. He doesn't consecrate the ground, he simply turns the soil over them, letting the earth perform the ultimate act of forgetting. The physical sensations of aging accelerate slightly now that the supernatural preservative is gone. His joints ache more noticeably after a long walk, and he sleeps longer, deeper. These small frailties are Calder's most cherished possessions, tangible proof of his mortality. He finds joy in needing Chloe's assistance to reach a high shelf, not because he is weak, but because it creates an opportunity for shared effort and acknowledged reliance. He is learning the beautiful arithmetic of interdependence. 1 + 1 equals a complete, finite existence, far richer than the solitary constant of infinity. Their final years together are a study in quiet gratitude. They watch the seasons turn, not counting the years remaining, but celebrating the richness of the current moment. Calder never becomes perfectly conventional. The shadow of the ancient vigil remains a texture beneath the surface, but it is dormant, harmless. He remains Calder, the man who saved the world only by choosing to let it save him back, one ordinary, imperfect day at a time. His final peace is not found in celestial reward, but in the simple, profound reality of sharing a cup of coffee with the woman he loved, under the slow, inexorable passage of the human sun. Vin Diesel's portrayal of Calder in The Last Witch Hunter, a performance steeped in a familiar stoicism that echoes roles like Riddick, anchors a narrative that attempts to blend ancient folklore with modern urban fantasy. The film, directed by Breck Eisner, borrows heavily from established supernatural action templates, yet struggles to forge a distinct identity within the crowded genre landscape. Calder, cursed with immortality after slaying the Witch Queen centuries ago, exists in a perpetual state of weary vigilance, his existence a thinly veiled metaphor for the burdens of endless life, a theme often explored in genre cinema where the hero is perpetually set apart from humanity. The inherent conflict revolves around the resurgence of the Witch Queen, Chloe Grace Moritz's character, the young witch Chloe, serving as the necessary foil and bridge to the human world. Moretz, whose career has often flirted with darker, more complex roles since her breakthrough, brings a necessary, if somewhat underdeveloped, kinetic energy to the proceedings. Her character represents the fragile, misunderstood remnants of magic in a world that has largely forgotten or suppressed it. The dynamic between the grizzled immortal hunter and the inexperienced yet powerful young witch is a well-worn trope, designed to facilitate exposition and provide opportunities for mentorship, albeit rushed ones here. The visual aesthetic leans into a neo-Gothic sensibility transplanted onto a contemporary New York City backdrop. While the initial presentation of the subterranean witch society and the towering dark architecture offers some atmospheric potential, the CGI execution often feels weightless, failing to imbue the magical elements with genuine menace or spectacle. This lack of visual conviction undermines the stakes. The supernatural conflicts often register as mere elaborately choreographed fight sequences rather than genuine clashes of cosmic power. Elijah Wood, as Calder's confidant and the keeper of historical lore, provides the narrative lubrication required to explain the intricate rules of this particular magical ecosystem. Wood, known for navigating complex narrative landscapes, is relegated here to the role of the exposition engine, delivering crucial information with the slightly frantic energy he often brings to roles requiring him to react to extraordinary circumstances. His performance, while committed, highlights the screenplay's reliance on overt explanation rather than organic discovery. What ultimately limits The Last Witch Hunter is its refusal to fully commit to the implications of its own mythology. Diesel's performance, while consistent with his established action persona, physically imposing and emotionally guarded, leaves little room for vulnerability, which is essential when dealing with themes of eternal regret. The script touches upon the loneliness of immortality, the cyclical nature of vengeance, and the blurring lines between hunter and hunted, but these philosophical undercurrents are quickly swept aside in favor of the next required action set piece. The film functions adequately as a straightforward action vehicle, fueled by Diesel's established screen presence, but it lacks the narrative depth or genuine imaginative spark needed to elevate it beyond the immediate, often predictable confrontation with darkness. The inspiration drawn from older, more successful fantasy epics feels like a direct template rather than a springboard for original storytelling. The emotional core of Calder's unending existence, which Diesel so stoically embodies, remains largely inaccessible to the audience. We are told he suffers, that the loss of his family centuries prior fuels his relentless pursuit, yet the mannerisms are too polished, too firmly rooted in the action hero archetype he perfected in the Fast and Furious saga. There is a palpable yearning for the raw, almost animalistic anguish that perhaps Michael Caine brought to similar roles dealing with protracted suffering, or even the quiet, internalized pain Diesel himself managed to convey during the quieter moments of the first Riddick. Here, the pain seems performative, a necessary shield rather than a true reflection of his character's burden. Chloe's introduction is meant to inject urgency and a touch of modern rebellion into the ancient war. Moretz successfully conveys a sense of being an outsider twice over, both magical in a mundane world and young in a conflict steeped in centuries of tradition. Her initial distrust of Calder, despite their shared opposition to the Queen, is palpable, driven by the generational gap in understanding how this war should be waged. She represents the emotional immediacy that Calder has systematically suppressed. Where Calder is logic and grim necessity, Chloe is instinct and nascent power, a necessary spark against the eternal gloom Diesel carries. The film's world-building, while visually ambitious in its concept, the hidden magical society existing beneath the recognizable veneer of skyscrapers, falters in execution. The aesthetic often settles into a generic dark fantasy palette. The magic itself lacks a signature visual language. When Chloe unleashes power, or when Calder utilizes his own inherent anti-witch abilities, the visual payoff often devolves into particle effects that feel less awe-inspiring and more obligatory, a checklist item in the modern supernatural blockbuster script. One wishes for the tactile, grounded sense of magic found in films where the sorcery felt intrinsically tied to the environment, rather than superimposed upon it. Wood's character, Dolan, serves primarily as a walking, talking history book, a necessary device to tether the audience to the Byzantine rules governing the truce between the Witch Council and the witch hunters. Wood's expressive face, often capable of conveying confusion or terror with such conviction, is largely underutilized here, constrained by dialogue designed purely for information transfer. His relationship with Calder, forged over decades of shared secrets, should feel rich with shared trauma and dark humor. Instead, it registers as functional partnership, the veteran and the technician coordinating a long-running operation. The film hints at a deep bond strained by immortal duty, but never allows these characters the breathing room to truly inhabit that shared history outside of mission parameters. Ultimately, the film operates on surface tension. It promises a deep dive into the ethics of eternal warfare and the nature of being set apart from the human condition, themes rich with dramatic potential, especially given Diesel's established persona as the outsider hero. Yet, the narrative continually prioritizes the momentum of the chase and the inevitable confrontation. It ends up feeling like a highly competent pilot episode for a television series that was never greenlit, possessing all the necessary components: the brooding hero, the reluctant apprentice, the looming ancient evil, but failing to synthesize them into a truly resonant cinematic experience that stands apart from its genre predecessors. The relentless, almost monastic dedication of Calder feels less like a noble quest and more like an inescapable behavioral tic by this point in Diesel's filmography. His armor of immortality, which should be a source of profound tragedy, reads more like a well-worn leather jacket, familiar, comfortable, and offering predictable resistance. We observe his actions, his calculated movements in combat, but rarely connect with the centuries of accumulated grief that supposedly motivate him. This detachment is a significant impediment. When the narrative attempts to introduce emotional anchors, such as the brief glimpses of his lost family through flashbacks, they feel disconnected, like required cutscenes in a video game, rather than organic recollections. There is a missed opportunity to explore the true psychological toll of witnessing the world continually move on without you, a theme far more compelling than the mechanics of banishing an ancient witch. Chloe, in contrast, injects a welcome dose of youthful defiance. Moretz plays her as fiercely independent, resentful of the established order represented by Calder and the secretive council. Her magic, described as primal and intuitive, contrasts sharply with the rigid, codified procedures followed by the hunters. This difference in approach creates necessary friction. She is not just a powerful ally, she is a necessary disruption to Calder's stagnant existence. Her frustration with his paternalistic command mirrors the audience's own desire for the protagonist to break free from his self-imposed constraints. She pushes him, not just physically in battle, but emotionally, forcing him to confront the human connections he has deliberately severed. The setting of New York City, usually a vibrant character in modern urban fantasy, here serves merely as a dark, imposing shell. The cinematography favors deep shadows and muted blues, attempting to establish an atmosphere of perpetual twilight, but this often renders the action muddy and indistinct. The architecture becomes monolithic rather than evocative, functioning as obstacles for set pieces rather than as markers of a secret, coexisting world. We are supposed to believe that hidden within this hyper-visible metropolis exists a robust, secret magical society, yet the film fails to grant us any genuinely awe-inspiring views of its inner workings that feel organically integrated. The underground witch lairs look suspiciously like repurposed sound stages decorated with standard fantasy iconography, glowing runes and oversized candelabras. Elijah Wood's Dolan is the film's conscience, the character burdened with the full knowledge of the history Calder tries to bury beneath his endless fighting, while Wood's eyes often convey more genuine concern than Diesel's restrained performance allows. His character's function remains strictly tethered to exposition delivery. His conversations with Calder are less dialogues between comrades and more mandatory briefings. The depth of their historical relationship, how many wars they have survived together, the secrets they share, remains theoretical. We observe their professional cooperation, but never truly feel the weight of decades spent watching each other age, or, in Calder's case, not age, which is a narrative shortcut that weakens the sense of shared destiny. The film relies too heavily on the audience accepting established relationships rather than earning the emotional payoff of those bonds. The central antagonist, the Witch Queen, embodied by Layla Haddad, suffers from the familiar curse of modern fantasy villains, being immensely powerful in theory yet oddly inert in dramatic presence. Her motivation stems from a desire to reclaim the world she believes was stolen from her, a centuries-old grudge that necessitates mass destruction. While the concept of the Queen initiating a plague or rebirth cycle offers high stakes, her screen time is fragmented, often relegated to shadowy pronouncements or brief, visually overwhelming attacks. This pacing issue means the audience perceives the threat primarily through the reactions of Calder and Dolan, rather than feeling the Queen's impending doom directly. The visual design for her final, fully empowered form leans heavily into high-contrast darkness and CGI tendrils, resembling numerous other cinematic manifestations of ultimate evil, foregoing any unique iconography that might have made her terror more memorable. The film's action choreography attempts to bridge the gap between Diesel's established, grounded brawling style and the requirement for supernatural combat. When Calder engages in hand-to-hand combat, there is a satisfying, bone-jarring weightiness that speaks to his physical immortality and combat conditioning. However, moments intended to showcase magic, such as the deployment of enchanted weaponry or the brief use of Chloe's raw abilities, often feel too weightless or digitally processed. The inconsistency in the visual representation of power levels undermines the narrative's tension. If Calder is supposed to be overwhelmingly powerful against standard witches, the fight choreography needed to reflect that decisive advantage more clearly, rather than relying on numerous disposable adversaries to pad the runtime. The theme of redemption, central to Calder's character arc, is handled with frustrating superficiality. His journey is supposedly about learning to care again, to value the fleeting lives around him, catalyzed by Chloe. Yet, this emotional thawing happens too rapidly, driven by plot necessity rather than earned character development. He moves from detached observer to protective guardian within a few key scenes, betraying the centuries of emotional hardening the narrative promised. For an actor like Diesel, whose strength lies in embodying characters defined by unwavering loyalty or singular focus, the film struggles to chart the necessary course through vulnerability required for this particular redemption story. The ending, which leaves the door open for continuation, suggests a world where Calder has made peace with his burden. But the mechanism of that peace feels less like a profound internal shift and more like the successful completion of the mission objective, leaving the deeper emotional resonance unexplored. The narrative structure, in its haste to propel Calder from point A to point B, consistently sacrifices thematic exploration for forward momentum. This is particularly evident in the film's handling of the witch hunter order itself. We are given tantalizing glimpses of their stringent dogma, the oaths sworn, and the isolation demanded, yet these elements never coalesce into a fully realized societal structure that explains the depth of Calder's commitment or the source of his existential fatigue. His existence feels less like a religiously motivated crusade and more like a mandated sequel setup. The rigid code he adheres to, the suppression of emotion, the avoidance of attachment, is presented as the necessary cost of his duty, but the film fails to show the audience the real, grinding monotony of that sacrifice across epochs. We see the result, the stoic warrior, but not the slow erosion of the man beneath the armor. Chloe's rebellion against the established hunter-witch hierarchy is another area ripe for deeper exploration that ultimately yields shallow fruit. Her desire to forge a path where magic and humanity can coexist rather than simply being suppressed or eliminated represents the genuine thematic challenge of the urban fantasy genre. How does the hidden world integrate without causing chaos? Moretz imbues Chloe with a necessary spark of idealism, but this idealism is quickly weaponized into battle strategy rather than allowed to inform a genuine philosophical debate with Calder. Their disagreements should pivot on worldview, the past versus the future, but instead they usually revolve around tactical decisions regarding the immediate threat of the Queen. The potential for a generational clash of ideologies is sidelined for a temporary partnership of necessity. The film's reliance on established action beats also impacts the emotional tone during conflict sequences. Even when Calder is supposedly facing overwhelming odds or witnessing the near destruction of his only ally, the camera work and Diesel's performance remain calibrated for a PG-13 action spectacle. There is little genuine fear projected. The stakes feel manufactured because the protagonist himself appears fundamentally untouchable, save for the narrative requirement that he be momentarily subdued. This lack of true peril dulls the impact of any victory. A truly effective immortal hero story demands that the hero feels the fragility of the mortal world acutely, making their protection of it meaningful. Here, Calder feels insulated from the consequences of failure in a way that cheapens the stakes for everyone around him. Dolan, the chronicler, remains the most tragic victim of the screenplay's blunt instrument approach to exposition. Wood deserves credit for imbuing scenes where he is merely reading an ancient text with an air of importance, attempting to sell the weight of the lore. Yet, his character exists solely to provide context for the audience, never truly engaging with Calder on a level that suggests a friendship forged in fire and time. Their shared history is stated, but never performed. When Calder is faced with difficult choices, such as whether to trust the burgeoning power of Chloe, Dolan's input is often strictly advisory, rooted in historical precedent, rather than rooted in a relationship where genuine emotional appeal or warning could be deployed. This functional relationship leaves the audience craving the messy, complicated intimacy of long-term comradeship that has been successfully mined in other fantasy narratives. The failure to convincingly render the supernatural elements extends critically to the film's depiction of the Witch Queen's machinations. Her ability to manipulate dreams and sow discord, a psychological weapon far more potent against an immortal burdened by memory than brute force, is regrettably underutilized. When the Queen intrudes upon Calder's consciousness, these moments lack the hallucinatory disorientation that would truly probe his centuries-old psyche. Instead, they often manifest as straightforward visual threats, shadowy figures and jarring sounds, reducing psychological warfare to mere jump scares repackaged with arcane jargon. Haddad's performance, confined largely to brief, exposition-heavy appearances, suggests a formidable antagonist whose true threat level is perpetually held in reserve, only fully deployed when the script dictates the final act must commence. The inherent contrast between Calder's world-weariness and Chloe's burgeoning, impulsive power is the film's most promising, yet most frustratingly underdeveloped emotional engine. Chloe embodies the potential for rebirth and change, the idea that even ancient conflicts can be approached with new perspectives. Moretz skillfully projects this impatience, the feeling of being stifled by rules established long before her birth. Calder, in his rigid adherence to tradition, becomes the embodiment of stagnation. The genuine emotional breakthrough required for Calder to truly accept Chloe's mentorship, and by extension, a path toward letting go of his static existence, is rushed through montages of successful teamwork. We see them fighting effectively side by side, which signals alliance, but we do not witness the difficult, slow process of trust being rebuilt after centuries of hunter isolation. Elijah Wood's Dolan serves as a tragic figure of necessary obsolescence. He is the repository of knowledge that the immortal Calder either chooses to ignore or has grown numb to. Dolan's concern for Calder feels deeply authentic, rooted in the anxiety of watching a friend remain fundamentally broken across the ages. However, the script ensures Dolan remains firmly in the role of the facilitator. He analyzes the ancient texts, diagnoses the problem, and relays the necessary information to the active hero, but he is rarely allowed to participate in the risk or share the emotional weight of Calder's near-death experiences. This separation keeps the relationship sterile, preventing the audience from investing in Dolan as anything more than a useful narrative tool designed to bridge gaps in the audience's understanding of the mythology. In summation, The Last Witch Hunter remains tethered to the predictable rhythms of its source material inspirations, settling for a functional action framework rather than a compelling fantasy epic. Diesel's stoicism, while expected, prevents the necessary vulnerability needed to sell the tragedy of immortality. The film presents a grand, sweeping mythology concerning ancient curses and perpetual war, but filters these massive concepts through a lens so commercially cautious that the emotional and supernatural stakes feel consistently lowered, leaving behind a serviceable but ultimately forgettable urban fantasy outing where the burden of the past weighs heavily, yet never truly settles upon the protagonist's soul. The film's sound design often mirrors its visual inconsistencies, creating an uneven sensory experience. The supernatural combat sequences are frequently punctuated by loud, almost percussive impacts designed to convey raw power. But these sounds lack the organic resonance that would tie them to the physical space or the character's exertion. When Calder unleashes his inherent abilities, the sound effect is often a synthesized whoosh or crackle, reminiscent of generic sci-fi rather than ancient ritualistic magic. This sonic environment reinforces the sense that the supernatural elements are imported components rather than intrinsic parts of this specific narrative universe. In contrast, the moments of silence or near silence surrounding Calder's quiet reflection, though sparse, carry more weight, suggesting the oppressive vacuum his immortality creates in the noisy human world. Furthermore, the pacing suffers from an over-reliance on jump cuts to transition between exposition-heavy dialogue and immediate, high-octane action. This editing choice keeps the audience engaged on a purely kinetic level, but prohibits any sustained immersion in the emotional reality of the character's predicament. For instance, Calder's centuries-long commitment to his task is meant to feel burdensome, yet the speed at which he processes new information from Dolan and immediately executes a plan suggests a man operating on autopilot, not one grappling with the psychological weight of an endless war. This relentless forward drive serves the demands of a standard action picture, but actively works against the deeper character study the premise promises, leaving the audience admiring the proficiency of the movements rather than empathizing with the motivations behind them. The underdeveloped nature of the Witch Council further contributes to the narrative flatness. Presented as the bureaucratic oversight overseeing the truce, the council members appear largely as detached elders who exist primarily to issue warnings or bestow necessary artifacts upon Calder. They are a political structure without palpable political intrigue. We never see the internal dissent or the real compromises required to maintain a centuries-long ceasefire between immortal magical factions. This omission renders the Hunter world less of a complex secret society and more of a thinly defined law enforcement agency. If the council held genuine, difficult sway over Calder, his moments of independent action would feel more rebellious and consequential. Instead, his breaking of their rules feels merely like a plot mechanic to force him into closer proximity with Chloe and the main conflict. The overall tone aspires to the brooding seriousness of dark fantasy, but often slides into the glossy superficiality of a mainstream blockbuster. This tonal ambiguity prevents the film from fully committing to the darkness inherent in Calder's curse. Vin Diesel, whose screen charisma is undeniable, naturally gravitates toward roles where he is the unstoppable force. Here, the narrative requires him to be a tragic, haunted figure struggling against his own curse, yet the script rarely grants him the space or the dialogue to articulate that inner struggle beyond clipped, world-weary pronouncements. The conflict between the required action hero persona and the desired tormented immortal is never fully resolved, resulting in a protagonist who is expertly competent but emotionally remote, leaving the audience admiring the spectacle while waiting for a deeper connection that never quite materializes. The film's attempt to establish a moral gray area regarding the existence of magic ultimately feels compromised by its simplistic hero-villain dichotomy. Calder exists as the paragon of necessary, albeit grim, order, fighting the perceived chaos represented by the Witch Queen. However, the shades of gray are introduced almost exclusively through Chloe, whose existence as a sympathetic witch begs the question of why the entire order must remain so rigidly segregated and hostile. If there are witches capable of being allies, or at least morally neutral entities, then Calder's unwavering, near-religious adherence to his mandate feels less like noble duty and more like willful blindness, a narrative device to manufacture conflict rather than a true reflection of complex ethical dilemmas. The script hints at internal debates within the Hunter ranks regarding this rigidity, but these dissenting voices are too muted to provide genuine dramatic weight against Calder's monolithic certainty. Chloe's developing proficiency with her powers serves as a visual counterpoint to Calder's brute force reliance on his enchanted gear. As she gains confidence, her magic is shown to be more fluid, intuitive, and perhaps even more dangerous because it is untamed by centuries of Hunter protocols. Moritz effectively communicates the frustration of youth trying to correct the mistakes of the past. She views the ancient truce not as a necessary evil, but as a failure of imagination on the part of Calder's generation. This contrast is powerful, the old guard defined by what they have lost and suppressed, and the new generation defined by what they might still gain. Yet this potential philosophical sparring is too frequently interrupted by the need to immediately dispatch a wave of CGI-enhanced minions, preventing the thematic tension from simmering long enough to truly boil over into character transformation. Elijah Wood's Dolan, despite his earnest delivery, often functions as a mere sounding board for Calder's operational status updates. The scenes where Dolan pores over ancient texts, frantically searching for the loophole or the forgotten counterspell, carry an air of manufactured urgency. We understand that he possesses the intellect and the historical grounding that Calder has sacrificed for physical prowess and unending vigilance. But this dynamic establishes a clear hierarchy where intellect is subservient to action. There is a missed opportunity to explore the psychological toll on the non-immortal confidant, the human who must constantly manage the existential fallout of an immortal's actions, living a life perpetually overshadowed by eternal duty. Dolan's relative normalcy makes him the audience surrogate, but his proximity to Calder never translates into true emotional leverage over the hunter. Ultimately, the film fails to convince us that Calder has truly suffered the unique anguish of his immortality beyond a baseline level of melancholy. For a character who has witnessed the rise and fall of empires and the death of countless loved ones, his emotional register remains surprisingly narrow, fitting neatly within the parameters of a standard action hero persona established in earlier diesel vehicles. The film sets the stage for a profound meditation on memory, duty, and regret, themes perfectly suited for an actor known for conveying internal isolation, but the story retreats to the safety of a clear-cut confrontation. The lingering feeling is one of narrative conservatism. A potentially rich, dark fantasy world populated by compelling figures is ultimately constrained by a screenplay unwilling to let its immortal protagonist become too emotionally messy or its mythology too ambiguous. The visual execution of the magical realm itself, particularly the architecture and illumination utilized by the witches, feels curiously derivative, echoing established fantasy aesthetics without offering a unique signature. The subterranean environments are bathed in an uninspired, almost clinical amber and smoky haze, suggesting ancient power rather than embodying it with genuine atmosphere. This visual language is too broad, failing to distinguish the specific nature of this particular magical society from countless others presented on screen. Calder, the constant anchor, moves through these settings with practiced familiarity, his movements economical and betraying no surprise, which speaks volumes about the repetitive nature of his existence, but simultaneously flattens the novelty of the environment for the viewer. He is a known variable in an ever-changing set of magical backdrops. The relationship that develops between Calder and Chloe is supposed to represent the delicate, necessary re-engagement with human feeling, yet it progresses with the efficiency of a carefully plotted narrative beat rather than organic discovery. Chloe's initial hostility stems from a valid skepticism toward the immortal enforcers who have maintained a repressive peace for centuries. Moritz plays this defiance with sharp edges, embodying the frustration of being judged by standards she never agreed to. However, once she is integrated into the mission, her role rapidly shifts from critical foil to skilled but ultimately deferential apprentice. The script denies them the opportunity for sustained ideological conflict, opting instead for quick moments of shared peril that serve as shorthand for mutual respect, rather than earning the deep, slow burn of trust required between a centuries-old immortal and a young revolutionary. Dolan's fate within the narrative underscores the film's prioritization of the main action unit over the supporting emotional infrastructure. Wood imbues the scenes where Dolan is researching or recovering from trauma with a palpable sense of human vulnerability, a stark contrast to Calder's near invulnerability. Yet, his inherent mortality makes him a liability that the plot must protect or conveniently sideline. When Calder is forced to confront potential loss, it is usually Dolan who is placed in jeopardy, a trope that highlights the human cost of the war without truly forcing Calder to grapple with the emotional consequences of attachment in the present moment. His function is almost purely defensive in the narrative structure. He defends the audience's understanding of the rules, while Calder handles the external threats. The film's exploration of immortality is frustratingly shallow. We are continually reminded that Calder is cursed, yet Vin Diesel plays him with the confidence of a man operating at peak efficiency, not a soul crushed by endless repetition. The true horror of immortality is the erosion of meaning and memory, but Calder's memories seem perfectly intact and neatly catalogued, ready to be deployed as motivation when convenient. This lack of genuine psychological damage prevents the audience from fully grasping the weight of his existence. He is not haunted, he is merely motivated. This fundamental misstep ensures that even the most visually dramatic confrontations lack the profound, existential dread that elevates stories about eternal life beyond standard action fare. The film settles for the aesthetic of tragedy without embracing its emotional implications. The recurring motif of Calder's weapons, particularly the sword and various enchanted implements, visually represents his reliance on externalized power rather than internal growth. These objects are relics, imbued with ancient power, mirroring Calder himself as a relic of a bygone era, stuck in a loop of required actions. Diesel handles the sword work with the familiar, heavy deliberation we associate with his action roles, emphasizing physical strength and commitment. However, the magic imbued in these tools often feels like a narrative cheat code, allowing him to bypass genuine magical duels that might test Chloe or force him to learn new adaptive strategies. His tools are extensions of his unchanging nature. They are solutions inherited from the past, which clashes awkwardly with Chloe's burgeoning, chaotic, and perhaps ultimately more adaptive magical potential. The visual language suggests a rigid adherence to formula, the sword for the old ways, the raw magic for the new, but the film rarely allows the new way to truly challenge the efficacy of the old. The characterization of the Witch Queen suffers immensely from a failure to grant her screen presence commensurate with the threat she supposedly poses. She is consistently framed as an existential endpoint, the culmination of centuries of suppressed magical grievance. Layla Haddad projects a suitable regal menace, but the screenplay seldom permits her to engage in nuanced manipulation or strategy that would make her feel like an intellectual equal to the ancient Hunter Order. Her primary interaction with the world is through mass destruction or possession, tactics that bypass the complex ethical framework the film tries to establish elsewhere. A truly compelling antagonist in a story about eternal conflict should challenge the protagonist's core beliefs, not just his physical defenses. The Queen exists too much in the abstract, a looming apocalyptic deadline against which Calder must race, rather than a dynamic, reasoning force capable of exploiting Calder's specific, centuries-old psychological weaknesses. Dolan's role as the living library often confines Elijah Wood to the narrative margins, turning him into a static observer